We are on now to have the third commission paper to be taken by Sharon Slater. And as I've said earlier on in the introduction, Sharon Slater is the president of Family Watch International and the chair of United Nations Family Rights Caucus. We are glad to have you, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here with you today.
You are most welcome.
Can I share my screen? Have you set it up so that I could do that?
Please, Tom, you have the floor now.
Okay, just a minute here. Okay. I'm just finding the right screen to share. We'll be with you in just a moment. Okay. Give me just a moment here. First of all, I am so honored to be with you today and to have this opportunity to talk about the importance of the integration of the family and the protection of the family as the fundamental unit of society. And without the family, nations fall. In fact, we have a theme song that we use at Family Watch. It's called Save the Family. And it starts like this. It says, the family is the beating heart that keeps the nation strong. If families fail, then nations fall, and all that's good is gone. The time is now, the time is here for everyone to see that if we are to save the world, we must save the family. And I'm going to talk about some serious threats to the family in Africa and in Nigeria today, and things that we are going to need to do to protect our own families. And let me just share my screen here and start with this. Done. Okay, I think I got it. Okay, here we are. Family Watch International, the organization that I represent, works to protect the family around the world. In fact, we work at the United Nations. We have something that's called consultative status, which allows us to go into the UN negotiations and affect what's going on family policies. We work with a number of African governments and advise often many members of the African voting bloc on family issues. And unfortunately, the worldwide family, which would include the Nigerian family, is under attack, and our children are under attack. And this attack is coming from Western governments and also many UN agencies. And we're going to walk you through some of the evidence. And I ask you to fasten your seatbelts because some of this information is going to be very disturbing. But if you don't understand it, it's going to be much more difficult for you to protect your families. The assault that comes is after the hearts and minds of our children, because they know that if they can capture the hearts and minds of the children, that they're going to be able to change all the gender and sexual norms of African society and Nigeria's society. And so we're coming after them with all sorts of information that usually comes in the form of what we call the war on children. And we would invite you to go to this website, stopcsc.org, to watch a documentary called The War on Children that will go more into depth with some of the things that I'm going to present to you today. But I just want to start with a little history of how I became involved in the protection of the African family. This is my family, and you'll notice some African faces as we had the opportunity to adopt 3 AIDS orphans. Their mother and father died of AIDS. They're Luis, Amelia, and Afonso when we met them. They were 3 years old, 7, and 9. And when I went back and forth from Mozambique, where they lived, I started to identify that there were awful things being taught to children. And these programs were being sponsored by UN agencies and the donor countries. And this, my daughter Amelia, who we later adopted, and now she's given me 2 wonderful grandchildren. She was 9 years old when she came home with this booklet, supposedly to protect her from HIV, but it had graphic pictures of how to engage in anal sex, and therefore under the guise of trying to protect her and helping her to use a condom. And so as I went, not just to Mozambique, but to multiple African countries, I started seeing a theme that many of these countries were promoting something called comprehensive sexuality education. And I guess I should rather say not the countries, but the donor agencies and the UN agencies on the ground in these countries. But to understand what this is, it's important to understand what sexuality is and how the United Nations defines sexuality. This comprehensive sexuality education is like the Pandora's box that brings in all sorts of controversial agendas. And it's the #1 tool of the global sexual rights agenda, is what is comprehensive sexuality education. So to understand how the UN defines sexuality, we need to go to the World Health Organization's definition. And they say that sexuality encompasses such things as gender identities, pleasures, desires, fantasies, eroticisms, and so forth. And so I just want to do a check here. I got a little note that popped up on my screen. So can you all see my screen and the slides I'm sharing? I hope you can just confirm that. It looks like all that should be well. So here we have up on the screen this controversial definition that is the controlling definition used by all the UN agencies. So if you're going to have sexuality education that's comprehensive, you can imagine what that will look like, and I'll show you examples. Let's just start with the World Health Organization. They have created, for example, the standards for sexuality education for Europe. And they're recommending that children be taught, beginning at 0 newborn age to 4 years old, that they can get enjoyment and pleasure through masturbation, and they should be given a right to explore their gender identities. At age 9, they're to learn about pleasure, masturbation, and orgasm. At age 15, a change from positive negative feelings and disgust and hatred towards homosexuality to acceptance and celebration. And they're to learn that they can get sexual pleasure, and that they can, how to come out to be homosexual or bisexual. Now, one would wonder why the World Health Organization would be promoting such, but International Planned Parenthood Federation helped co-write this manual and many of the UN manuals. And the World Health Organization actually sends youth in that module to this publication by International Planned Parenthood to teach children how to learn about their sexual rights. And what are they going to learn from International Planned Parenthood Federation? They're going to learn that all women have the right to abortion that is accessible, affordable, acceptable, and convenient to all. They're going to learn in this publication, Exclaim, A Young People's Guide to Sexual Rights, an IPPF declaration, that young people are sexual beings that have sexual needs, desires, and fantasies, and that they have a right to express their sexualities in pleasurable and safe ways. And that sexuality and sexual pleasure are important parts of being a human, no matter what age. I found this publication at the United Nations, which is a young person's guide to their rights and sexuality. And it's meant for people living with HIV. It's called Healthy, Happy, and Hot, again, publicized by International Planned Parenthood Federation. And they're actually suggesting that children should learn about sexual pleasure. And they can get sexual pleasure in various ways, including through licking, tickling, sucking, cuddling. And this, again, this is for HIV-infected youth, but the most unconscionable part of this is that it teaches youth that some countries have laws that say people living with HIV must tell their sexual partners about their sexual status before having sex. These laws violate the rights of people living with HIV. In other words, they're actually telling youth they don't have to tell their sexual partners if they are infected with the HIV virus. And yet the World Health Organization is sending youth to this organization that created this publication, International Planned Parenthood Federation, also known as IPPF, to learn about these sexual rights, if you can imagine. Now this hits really close to home because, as I mentioned, the 3 children we adopted from Mozambique, Their mother died of AIDS, their father died of AIDS, and I cared for their older brother during the last stages of AIDS before he died. And to me, it is unconscionable that any organization would be allowed, such as International Planned Parenthood Federation, would be allowed to partner with multiple UN agencies in pushing this horrible anti-health, anti-child, anti-family agenda onto Africa, and especially those infected with the HIV virus. So why might they be doing this? Well, Planned Parenthood profits from sexualizing children. They sell them condoms, abortions. Even in the United States, they're giving them hormones to try to change their sex, even though that's impossible. Contraceptives, comprehensive sexuality education, sexual counseling, and more. And in the US, we know they've been implicated for even selling the body parts of aborted babies. So this is big business if they can sexualize children and get them hooked onto their services. And unfortunately, International Planned Parenthood Federation has over 65,000 service points in 170 countries. So they have these clinics where they can profit all over the world. Now, to understand the UN's agenda for for comprehensive sexuality education, we need look no further than the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality. This was published with the firepower of all these UN agencies and even UNICEF, the agency charged with protecting the world's children. And yet it seeks to redefine abstinence, saying abstinence doesn't just mean choosing not to have sex, it also means deciding when to start having sex and with whom. It falsely claims that abstinence-only programs have been found to be ineffective and potentially harmful to young people's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now, I want you to keep this term in mind, sexual and reproductive health and rights. It's one of the most problematic policy terms, bringing in all these harmful agendas. Children are to be taught, according to these UN agencies, that each person's decision to be sexually active should be respected at all times. They're to learn to summarize key elements of sexual pleasure. And here is where we're driving into the theme of this conference, which is to protect the institution of the family and the integration of the family. They actually ask children to question the social and cultural norms that impact sexual behavior in society, and then to differentiate between the values that they hold and their parents and guardians hold about sexuality. They're trying to separate children and get them to choose values separate from their families. And I'll show you how they do this through examples through various programs in Africa. Again, this is promoted by all these UN agencies. And you will notice on International Planned Parenthood's website that they list here as major partners, UNFPA and the World Health Organization. Did you know that multiple UN agencies funded by donor countries are promoting sexting as healthy for children? This UNFPA publication co-published with all these UN agencies. It's called Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. I want you to remember this term because this is the kind of thing that they believe is part of sexual and reproductive rights. This happened to be for young people in Asia and the Pacific. They start defining young people as young as 10 years old. So this is meant for 10-year-olds. And it describes sexting as sending, receiving, or sharing of sexually explicit text messages, photos, and videos. And you would think that these UN agencies would say this is a huge problem, but instead they say sexting may be used to seek positive feedback on body image from peers and therefore help to improve self-esteem and sense of identity. Can you imagine? For many young people, sexting may be a first expression of sexuality. This is particularly true for young people with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, for whom sexting may allow private exploration of sexuality and sexuality and intimacy. And sexting also has the potential to be beneficial as a way of sustaining intimate relationships and to demonstrate love, trust, and commitment. It calls upon governments to decriminalize consensual sex between young people, to decriminalize same-sex sexual activity. And here is the assault on parental rights. And here is where this is an attack on the integration of the family. It calls for removing parental consent requirements for children to access sexual and reproductive health, counseling, commodities, and services. Again, because Planned Parenthood is helping to write these manuals, and their goal is to use comprehensive sexuality education to get them into their sexual and reproductive health, their SRH clinics. Now, let's talk about CSC programs in Africa. The United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization produced this teacher training manual with the help of one of International Planned Parenthood Federation's partners, Advocates for Youth, and UNFPA. And what does this say? That, well, let's just talk just a moment about IPPF. We took this training, which they put on they're bragging about that they helped create for Africa, and we analyzed it, and we found that it had a harm score of 15 out of 15 harmful elements, and yet this is being taught to African children. It sexualizes children, saying that babies, children, and adolescents are sexual beings from birth. The children are sexual from the very moment they enter this earth. It promotes sexual pleasure and the right to sexual pleasure, the right to sexuality information, explicit sexuality education. It says the children have a right to decide whom they're going to be intimate with, whether it be people of the same sex or the opposite sex, to decide if and when and how many children they're going to have, which leads to their promoting a right to abortion. Teaches children that masturbation is a normal part of sexual expression. Many people of all ages masturbate, and you are normal if you do it. That masturbation with one's same-sex gender friends or caressing each other's genitals is common. Can you imagine this? And did you know that UNFPA is partnering with donor countries to teach children even about pedophilia, sodomy, sadism, sexual pleasure, and more? Let's see what UNFPA is teaching in this manual called Comprehensive Sexuality Education for Out-of-School Young People in Zambia. And it's hard to see these logos here at the bottom, but you can at least recognize the UNFPA logo. At the bottom, it shows that it also carries the logos of multiple governments. And these include the European Union, the UK, Sweden, Ireland, and Switzerland. In the program description, it says this is all about protecting children and their sexual and reproductive health. Again, that term, sexual and reproductive health. And this is for starting at age 10. And it seeks to desensitize children to sexual things, teaching them all about different sexual behaviors. You can read some of them up here that are quite graphic that I won't even read, teaching them about masturbation, sodomy, voyeurism, sexual pleasure through exhibitionism, sexual pleasure through bestiality, necrophilia, sexual pleasure with corpses, with urine. I mean, this is beyond the pale. And it reveals the hidden agenda to destroy the health and innocence of Africa's children, and thus the institution of the family, as children will form the future families of Africa. It says part of one of the purposes of one of the activities is to get participants to speak more comfortably when talking about sexuality in the different parts and sexual organs of the body. It has activities calling for children to brainstorm all the terms and ideas that they know regarding male sexual organs and female sexual organs and sexual intercourse. They say that this could be slang, scientific words, every word you've ever learned or thought about sex, put it up on the board, and let's discuss it. And it has this insidious mind manipulation element in all of these programs. And this is an example. I call this the sexual relativism activity, where the scale represents two choices young people can make about having sexual intercourse. either to have sexual intercourse or to wait. So they have these scales that say, okay, on one side are the reasons to have sex, on the other side are the reasons to wait. And you can choose for you whether you decide to want to wait or not. It doesn't encourage them to wait until marriage. They have another activity that has the purpose to identify the influences that they have in society that help them decide whether they're going to have sex and to decide whether they can disregard those things. Children are to be asked, what did you learn about when it's okay to start having sex from your family, your culture, religion, your friends? And because of culture and religious beliefs, different people are told they can't have sex, but it's your choice. You can decide when to have sex, thus separating them from their parents' values. Again, then trying to get them to be very comfortable about having sexual discussions with others. I'm sorry, I'm going to just quickly just pass this on because that was a very graphic picture, but that is also in this manual. And kids are supposed to label every body part while looking at a woman's, genitals with her legs spread open, a picture of that or a drawing of that. They want them to describe in detail what happens physically to the sexual parts of the body when a male or a female becomes sexually excited, and describes that to them. So I hope that you are as offended and as outraged as I am, and as many that work with us are, which is why we work to expose this agenda and help you understand it. But now I'm going to go to the CSE agenda specifically in Nigeria, and this is similar in many countries. The main promoters of CSE from the beginning have been Caucus. This is a US entity that was a spinoff of Planned Parenthood in the United States, called the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, Caucus. Also, Planned Parenthood Federation of Nigeria. They're the member organization of International Planned Parenthood Federation, and also Action Health Incorporated and Marie Stopes International. And I'll just walk you through some examples from some of these organizations. But if you go to Planned Parenthood Federation of Nigeria's website, you will see that they say they are a one-stop solution for your sexual and reproductive health and information and services. And they seek to hide the more controversial agenda. You can tell how controversial they are by their partners and who they're funded by. UNFPA, International Planned Parenthood Federation, Plan International, Planned Parenthood Global, the MacArthur Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and more. This is just a sampling. And they're all about getting contraceptive devices into children. Here's an article on their website, Sexuality Education. Is it a right or is it a right? So they promote the right to all sorts of sexual information. Here is their 2019 annual report, which teaches a little bit more about their actions. First, it explains their history, that they've been working in Nigeria for 30 years at least, and that they are promoting national policy approval for universal access to sexuality education. And they're addressing the pushback against young people's access to comprehensive sexuality education in Nigeria, which they say is a threat to the sexual health and rights of girls and women. Well, let's see what they believe is part of the sexual health and rights of girls in Europe. I'm going to go by this next drawing really, really quickly. This is from one of the videos on their website. And I'm just going to quickly, show you that's the kind of thing that they're showing to children in Nigeria. Also, you'll notice that the MacArthur Foundation is one of the major supporters of Action Health Incorporated, as well as different UN agencies and more. But starting with the history, they tell you straight out that starting way back in 1992, AHI, Action Health Incorporated, partnered with the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States to promote their agenda in Nigeria. So Caucus had a major impact. Well, Caucus in the United States, they just changed their name to Sex Ed is a Vehicle for Social Change, full stop. And that's what they're seeking to do, to change the gender and sexual norms and to promote abortion in African countries. In fact, they have a little thing on their website that says, if you care about abortion rights, then you should care about sex education. If you care about LGBTQ rights, then you should care about sex education, because they use sex education to advance abortion and LGBTQ rights. And that's what they were seeking to do when they introduced different aspects of their guidelines for comprehensive sexuality education into Nigeria's teaching of children. These guidelines establish what they think children should be taught, such as masturbation, either alone or with a partner, is one way that people can express their sexuality without risking pregnancy or STDs, that a legal abortion is very safe. And again, this whole mind manipulation, which has become the basis of many programs pushed in Nigeria, that some religions support the right to an abortion while others oppose abortion, trying to get children to think that maybe their religion is on the wrong side of abortion. Some people continue to respect their religion's teaching and traditions, but believe that some specific views are not personally relevant. Imagine putting that into the child's mind, that they can pick and choose which part of their religion's teachings or their family's teachings are relevant to them, and that they have a right to choose this, and that all people, regardless of their age, are sexual beings. Okay. The guidelines for comprehensive sexuality education in Nigeria were published by the Federal Ministry of Education, and the creation of the publication was driven by AHI and Caucus. This was back in 1996. In fact, UNESCO proudly posts these on their website. And here's just a glimpse into this publication, pushed by Caucus and influenced by Caucus's guidelines for comprehensive sexuality education. It's for levels 1 for children 6 through 8, then level 2, 9 through 12, and so forth. Again, right in this, it says it is co-sponsored by Action Health Incorporated and Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. And it also says that the others involved in the publication were the World Health Organization, UNFPA, and Planned Parenthood Federation of Nigeria, among others. And it starts at level 1, teaching that children at age 6 to 8 that male and female bodies respond alike when they're touched, and their bodies feel good when they're touched, and that human beings have a natural response to sexual stimulation starting at age 9, that all people are sexual beings at that age, and starting at age 13, that sexual feelings, fantasies, and desires are normal. They occur in all stages of life. Then at age 9, they need to learn about sexual identity and orientation. That sexual orientation refers to whether a person is heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. And that some men and women are homosexual, which means they'll be attracted to and fall in love with someone of the same sex, and so forth. And many young people have fantasies and dreams about the same gender, and this is common, and there's a certain percentage of your society which will be homosexual. All true, but why are we teaching this to children at such young ages? And then at level 3, when two people express their sexual feelings, they can give and receive pleasure, and that this can include exhibitionism, voyeurism, homosexuality, although maybe some religious groups and laws might disapprove of this. Homosexual, bisexual, and heterosexual people are alike except for their sexual attraction and approach. That's the only difference. So an abortion, that sometimes women become pregnant when they are unable or not ready to care for a child, and abortions performed under sterile conditions by a trained medical personnel is relatively safer. Here in level 3, others believe that a woman has a right to choose abortion. Deciding whether or not to have an abortion could be difficult. Some people continue to respect their religious teachings and traditions, but believe that some of these views do not apply to them. Again, putting that in the children's minds. Religious leaders contest many issues related to sexuality and reproduction, and it teaches them that they all disagree. So the children should choose their own values, independent from religion and their family. Sexuality in the arts. The sexual images are depicted in music, art, drama, and literature. And some religions frown on how that is, but erotic images reflect society's views, and they can help people appreciate sexuality. Think about that. They're promoting erotic images as something good for children because it helps people appreciate sexuality. Then let's go from 2000 to 2002. There was great opposition within Nigeria from religious and conservative groups that led to changes in the national curriculum. And the name was changed from sexuality education to family life and HIV education, or home and family life education. And that's the name that is currently used to promote both good programs and bad programs in Nigeria. So as parents, if you want to protect your children and your family, you need to look at the actual curriculum and not just look at the name of the curriculum to know what your children are being taught and to protect them. So this has the innocent name of Family Life and HIV Education. This is for junior secondary schools. This was published in 2007 and 2014, also by AHI. And it uses the UNESCO's International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education as part of the references and some other very highly controversial CSE programs. Again, it says reasons given for having sex, for not abstaining. Well, I wanted, it gives all these reasons that people might choose, and then lets children decide for themselves if these are good reasons or not. It teaches them about the clitoris, the sexual organ that gives sexual pleasure, or the part of the anatomy that does this. And I'm going to skip through this. I'm sorry, I was going to leave that out, but you can see there's explicit pictures for children. And it says the book complements an earlier publication, The Guidelines for Comprehensive Sexuality Education in Nigeria, and again refers to Caucus as helping to create and promote these materials. Myths surrounding masturbation. All religions teach that masturbation is a sin. Again, this is a myth. It's not a sin. This is a myth. Only perverts masturbate. Masturbation is only for boys. No, it's for girls too. People should not masturbate no more than once a week. Possible ways of experiencing sexual pleasure, talking about how to do that. Again, I don't want to go more into this. It's just, more of the same of all these things, teaching about abortion, promoting abortion, manipulating a parent's or a family's values about abortion, saying fear of parents or other family members and humiliation by members of committee may be a reason why you don't want to have an abortion. That you may have all these reasons, the pregnancy may be unwanted, but you can change and you can decide what you want for yourself, these programs teach. Several religions might disapprove, but others don't. So again, teaching children, they need to choose their own values independent from religion or their parents. This program is in multiple comprehensive sexuality education programs promoted by Planned Parenthood and UN agencies in multiple countries, included in the United States. And it has children line up different pictures that indicate the different various stages of sexual arousal, sex, erection, orgasm, and so forth, even a picture of the erect penis, and the children have to line them up in the right order, thus desensitizing them to sex. Now, you'll notice that the Ford Foundation is heavily involved in funding comprehensive sexuality education in Nigeria. It says Nigeria's Youth Futures Fund is launching with $5 million in seeding funding from the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation. The new fund hopes to raise $15 million and will increase leadership capacity, enhance educational opportunities, and build relationships between youth and for youth. And we know that it's being used to promote comprehensive sexuality education as part of leadership training for youth. Now, Dr. Natalia Canham had been appointed to UNFPA director in 2017, and in her bio, it shows she worked for the Ford Foundation. She served as the vice president of the Ford Foundation's Peace and Justice system, and they had invested between 2000 and 2016, the Ford Foundation, $56 million for sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people in West Africa. That's why she got promoted to that high position at UNFPA, because she was already involved in pushing their agenda. And it says the Ford Foundation in West Africa started a youth sexual and reproductive health coalition. They're leading the efforts to have open discussions with children about sexuality, sexual autonomy, and sexual pleasure. Now, sexual autonomy means the right to children to have sex without interference. So, and the Ford Foundation, this is them rallying outside the US Capitol to promote abortion. This is they're promoting the LGBT agenda in the US, and now they're doing it in Africa. Now, this brings me to probably the most dangerous threat facing the African family, the Nigerian family, and children that I have ever seen in my 22 years in working at the United Nations and in countries across the world. And it's called the ACP-EU Partnership Agreement. This is an agreement between the EU and the ACP, and the president of Nigeria and almost every other African president is expected to sign this agreement, a binding treaty with the EU, in April of this year. This has many names, this treaty. It's called the ACP-EU Partnership Agreement, the Post-Cotonou Agreement, and I'll tell you why that is in a moment. The Samoa Agreement, because there's tentative plans for the presidents who are part of this from the African nations and the other countries will be signing this agreement in Samoa, but we call it the devious EU treaty, and I'll show you why. In fact, we have an entire website on this treaty at eutreaty.org. Please go to this website, and if we have time at the end of my presentation, I'll walk you through some of the things that are on here. You can click on the first watch button on the left-hand side, and you will see a video that will describe why this is an assault on the health and innocence of children in the African family. And it's a full 45-minute webinar that I give on this topic. Then you can also see the 12 harmful elements in the ACP-EU treaty and sign a petition to African government officials and parliamentarians and presidents to stop this treaty or amend it. So to understand what this treaty is, we have to, if to be between the ACP and the EU, you need to understand what is the ACP. The ACP consists of a group of 79 African, Caribbean, and Pacific states. All of them had signed on to a 20-year Cotonou partnership agreement. Now, if we look at what that agreement was, it was an agreement, a 20-year binding agreement, binding all the ACP countries, including Nigeria, legally and economically to the European Union. It was largely a trade and development treaty, okay? It governed the economic and trade relations between the EU and the 79 countries in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. The original Cotonou Agreement was signed in February of 2000, and it united over 100 countries and represented over 1.5 billion people. So the new revised agreement that was going to continue for another 20 years, the one we're talking about now, the post-Cotonou Agreement, or the devious EU treaty that we call it, was signed, or initialed is the technical term, by the head of the ACP and the head of the European Commission on April 15th of last year in 2021. This had been negotiated over 2 years by all of the ACP and EU countries, and supposedly it's a final text, but we are challenging that. The name of the agreement on its, with the full name is a partnership agreement between the European Union and its member states on the one part, and members of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States on the other part. And the problem with this treaty is, in addition to trade and economic issues, this new 20-year revised version now brings in the controversial issues of human rights, And it uses the Call It a Human Rights strategy. It has over 100 references to human rights without defining them, which allows the European Commission to try to force their radical sexual rights, LGBT abortion rights agenda through those various provisions that are not specified. It has a problematic chapter now on human and social development, and one on global alliances and international cooperation. In fact, it seeks to obligate all the African and Caribbean countries to adopt joint resolutions, declarations, and statements, and to coordinate positions, and where appropriate, voting, and to take actions together in international organizations. This is to ensure a stronger voice. In other words, really is what it really means is the EU is trying to manipulate African countries to join with their other partners to have the same positions so that they can have a power grab, that they will have the majority, and the EU has bragged about this, that they will have a monopoly of the majority of UN member states when voting on policies at the United Nations, also possibly even at the African Union, because they calculate that there's 27 EU countries, 79 ACP countries, that's 106 countries. Now there's 193 UN member states, so that's more than half. If they're obligated to vote and have positions together, what power can that be? There's also 3 protocols within the agreement: an African protocol that applies just to Africa, a Pacific protocol applying just to the Pacific countries, and a Caribbean protocol. So here is the most problematic provision, or I should say one of them, because there's multiple, but this is one of the most problematic provisions as far as the topic we're talking about, comprehensive sexuality education. The Article 49.6 calls for universal access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information and education. Now, this is the new name for comprehensive sexuality education, because they realize that African governments, especially at the United Nations, and also many pro-life and pro-family NGOs on the ground in African countries, started to understand how dangerous comprehensive sexuality education is. The UN agencies and Planned Parenthood made a decision to start calling them instead comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information and education programs. However, we can tell what the European Union is going to be pushing here, because it says taking into consideration the UNESCO International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. And that's the guidance that I showed you that promotes all of those radical technical concepts to children, trying to sexualize them, that's published by all the UN agencies. Now, it's important to note that the African voting bloc at the United Nations, when the UN Sustainable Development Goals were developed, and Goal 3 had a goal on information and education related to sexual and reproductive health services, the African group put a reservation saying the African group does not think that comprehensive sexual education should be included as part of it. So the African voting bloc fights any reference to comprehensive sexuality education or any interpretation of any interpretation of sexual and reproductive health information to encompass comprehensive sexuality education. Yet this binding agreement, as shown in the previous slide, is actually locking African countries into the very position that they opposed. In fact, comprehensive sexuality education is being opposed all across Africa by those groups that understand its harmful nature. This was a CSC protest by NGOs in Kenya against comprehensive sexuality education. In Ghana, when comprehensive sexuality education was opposed, the Catholic bishops came out, and a number of bishops and leaders of various religions came out to say that this is a way to introduce homosexuality into the continent and into their country, and that it must be opposed. In fact, there was so much pushback in Ghana that the president of Ghana had to say, this can never happen, that I, as a president of Ghana, will sit and allow inappropriate material to be taught to our children. And here's where it shows in the guidelines that were being pushed in Ghana on comprehensive sexuality education, where it actually says that because there's too much pushback against the term comprehensive sexuality education, we're now going to call this comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education instead of CSE, so that people won't oppose it. It didn't say they're going to change the content. It said they were going to just change what they're calling it. So beware of any program that's called sexual and reproductive health information. Okay, now going back to the African Regional Protocol that's part of the devious EU treaty that's being proposed, it actually requires African governments to implement the protocol to the African Charter of Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa. That's also known as the Maputo Protocol. So why is the EU trying to tell African countries in a binding treaty that they must implement their own document? That this is a regional agreement between African countries, and now the EU is making itself a party to this. Well, they chose this document because they helped push, and Planned Parenthood helped push to make this document even come into fruition. And they were successful to getting into it in Article 14.2, that state parties shall take appropriate measures to protect the reproductive rights of women by authorizing abortion where the continued pregnancy endangers the mental or physical health of the mother. Now, this exception for mental and physical health is used all across the world to create a right for abortion for women for any reason. So the EU in this treaty is making African countries accountable to them to promote a right to abortion and to implement a right to abortion in their countries. And here's some part of the deception. After the ACPU text in April 15th of 2021 was adopted with the term sexual and reproductive health and rights in it, I failed to show you the slide that calls for sexual and reproductive health and rights to be a binding obligation in the ACPU treaty. It's only after the fact that the European Parliament adopted their definition for sexual and reproductive health and rights, which includes abortion, comprehensive sexuality education, sexual and reproductive health and rights for LGBTI persons, that includes the diversity of sexual orientation and gender identity, and so forth and so on. So to be clear, the term sexual and reproductive health, and especially if rights is attached to it, is the Trojan horse term in policy or in sex education to promote LGBT rights, abortion, sexual rights for youth, and comprehensive sexuality education. That's because it's a compound term. It includes sexual health and reproductive health, and the UN agencies have defined sexual health in this publication, Sexual Health, Human Rights, and the Law, to encompass abortion, the diversity of sexual behavior and expression, that's LGBT rights, and pleasurable sexual experiences. They're saying that if nations are to implement an agenda that will establish the right to sexual health, that they must decriminalize sex work or prostitution, legalize same-sex marriage, provide access to treatment for gender reassignment surgery. And they say that comprehensive sexuality education is crucial for sexual health because it advances the right to all of those things to children and changes their mindset on that. And who is a part of that? Well, you'll notice that the HRP, the Human Reproduction Program, is stamped on this publication that's defining sexual health for the whole world. And if you go to the World Health Organization website, you'll see that along with these UN agencies, that International Planned Parenthood Federation is the one NGO partner along with the World Bank that is, probably wrote this manual for all the UN agencies. So let's go back to this agreement. This says, this agreement will become binding upon the parties only after they complete their internal legal procedures necessary for entry into the force of the agreement. In other words, this agreement, since it's a binding treaty, the heads of state are, they haven't picked a date because there's still a lot of controversy within this agreement, even within the EU. Poland was very concerned about the sexual and reproductive health provisions of this. The country of Hungary was against some of the immigration provisions in this. And increasingly, we've been using, briefing a lot of African officials at the African Union, and increasingly they're starting to now say there could be serious problems with this agreement because it calls for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I've just really just touched the surfaces of the problems in here. So now it's not a certain thing that this will be signed by heads of state in April, but that's what the EU is pushing for, and that's what we need to stop. Again, I invite you to please go to this website, eutreaty.org. Please sign the petition by clicking the third option here, the petition to amend the treaty. And there's different ACP concerns, and I'm going to just, if you will allow me, I'm going to stop the share. But before I do this, can I ask the moderators, how much time do I have left? Do I have another 5 or 10 minutes? Or is my time up? If you would just let me know.
Already.
Pardon?
Your time is exhausted already.
Okay, so the time is exhausted. So I'll just take 1 minute. Instead of showing you this website, I would ask you to please click on ACP concerns and click on the brief for Africa, which will point out very succinctly 10 serious problems with this treaty. And it also has 7 questions that governments need to ask the EU to expose these problems within it. And we would invite you to talk to your government and ask them to, and your parliamentarians, to please ask the European Union to clarify the meaning of all these controversial terms. I presented really troubling information. We're in a world that's turned upside down, where good is being promoted as evil, and evil is being promoted for good. And this is about protecting the health and innocence of the African children, and in your country, of Nigeria's children. We invite you to join with us to protect them. There's lots of good news. There's studies that we have that we can point you to that show how CSE harms children, that you can use to get it stopped. You can join all of those who are rising up all around the world to fight comprehensive sexuality education. You can use this video we showed you at stopcsc.org. You can become a part of the Protect Nigerian Children Coalition by getting connected with us. You can join our Empowered Youth Coalition and mobilize the youth in your community to stand for life and family with others across the globe. You can get connected to all of these solutions and all of these efforts by going to our website at familywatch.org, and please subscribe to our newsletter. Please join us in protecting the African family and the health and innocence of Africa's children. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. We are glad to have you. Now I will hand over to moderator, who will request if we have questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sharon Slater, for this beautiful and educative lecture. We don't know if we have questions. Don't know if you have questions, so that before Sharon goes, she'll be able to answer your questions.
While you're waiting for a question, I would just like to say that I will make available the slides. I know I went very fast so that I could touch on lots of information, but you may have access to my slides. I can send it out through the organizers of the conference, where you can, go in depth and read everything that is on all these slides.
Okay. Okay. Questions? Oh, for Bertram? Any other person? Okay, number 2. Okay, give it to Prof.
Thank you for this very illuminating lecture. I'm so happy about the effort of your organization. Perhaps I didn't listen very well. That's why I want to ask this question. The question is this: what has been the role of faith-based organizations in this crusade? Because in Africa, in Nigeria, religious leaders carry much weight, and they can, one way or the other, influence their parishioners. So if they are not involved, you can still bring faith-based organization to bring a kind of intervention in getting your redeem of your crusade realized. Thank you.
Okay. Over to you, Sharon. You can
Thank
answer that
you.
question.
Yes, that is a critical question, and I'm very, very grateful for it. If you click on that website at eutreaty.org, where the tag is ACP Concerns, you will see the briefs from an organization in Kenya, which is the Kenyan Christian Professionals Forum. And they've created an entire brief on the ACPU agreement and the harms for Africa. They also have recently launched a regional entity to help religious leaders all throughout Africa join together to fight this and this agenda globally, across the African continent, but also this agreement that is this treaty that is being pushed. We have been doing briefings in various African countries for coalitions of African leaders, and they have been starting to take up the lead to issue letters, joint letters from all the various leaders of the major faith groups in each country. In Africa, I know Malawi is in the process of doing that now, to issue a letter to their parliamentarians, to their governments, to their ministries of education and foreign affairs, to ask them to ask those questions that are on that brief, also under ACP Concerns, and to start to investigate within their countries what's being taught to the children. What are the UN agencies doing? What are they doing in their after-school programs, which is where they bring in even more of their controversial agendas, to do an audit, and in particular right now, to do what they can to oppose the harmful provisions in the ACPU agreement, and to refuse to sign it until questions are answered and vague terms are defined, and that they can remove those harmful elements or put reservations on that treaty before they sign it. They need to put a reservation that says something like, nothing in this treaty can be construed to push obligations on African countries or on Nigeria related to sexual orientation, gender identity, sexuality education for children, and abortion. These are, the African religious leaders can play a huge role in this by making these important communications. And we are happy to do briefings. We could do a briefing for Nigeria's leaders. We have on the line right now Richard Kaketo, who is our policy advisor, who's Ugandan, and he resides in Kenya. We have some of our Africa team that's launched Family Watch Africa 2 years ago that can also join in these briefings. So we would love to collaborate and help to mobilize religious leaders in any way that we can.
That's good. So we want you to answer the second question. So from Dr. Bertram, please.
Sharon, thank you very much for your presentation. In Africa, we have leaders who are always cap in hands when it comes to begging for money, funding. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think if this matter concerns the United Nations, and we know that United Nations is not a Christian organization, if United Nations goes ahead to place financial embargo on any country that rejects this treaty, what do you think will happen to African countries when it has to do with funding?
You brought up the elephant in the room, right? Because in the end, this is all about funding. There's billions of dollars, that flow through this treaty and through the UN agencies and through the European countries, right? So I just want you to stop and think about this for a minute. The European countries and the UN agencies have a vested interest in investing in Africa. Regardless of what Africa decides on this treaty, they're going to be working with your governments to try to conduct trade because they benefit the most in that trade, right? So you can call their bluff when it comes to pushing the cultural imperialism and this radical, sexual ideology. My bet is if you contest it, if you assert your rights as sovereign nations to determine your own culture with regard to the family and sexual issues, and you issue reservations, if enough countries join together, and that's the key, if the African Union joins as a bloc, which is what we're trying to do, then you will be able to succeed in still removing all of these things while still being able to benefit from the aid and the true aid that's going to help your countries. But if you don't protest, if you don't join together with African countries, and Nigeria is one of the most powerful countries, they want business with you. You have to understand the advantage you have. You have the resources, you have what they want. So if you stand up for your rights, you have more negotiating power than you know. And again, by joining with the other African countries and by the religious groups, the heads and the faith leaders joining with the faith leaders in other countries, I strongly encourage you to organize yourselves and contact Kenyan Christian Professionals Forum, and who've established the African Forum for protecting the family and life. I think there's much good that can be done. If the faith leaders across the nation unite, if the mothers and fathers and parents unite and say, just think about the assault on parental rights that treaty is. How can an African government commit to give this sexuality education to children without even talking to the parents? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that parents have the right to guide the education of their children. You are part of binding treaties that recognize the rights of parents to guide the moral development of their children. You need to stand up for these rights, and you will win if you unite together.
Okay. A round of applause for Sharon for that beautiful lecture. So we hope next time when you are invited, you will honor our invitation. So from other participants, we don't know whether there are questions. I mean all liners. All liners. All liners. If you are online enjoying Sharon, if you have questions or questions for her, please ask before she goes. Okay, there's no question. So thank you, Sharon, for this beautiful lecture. So we appreciate you. Thank you.
I see a hand up from Yusuf Ayuba online.
Yeah.
One hand is up. Okay. Oh, thank you. You have the floor.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Thank you for the wonderful privilege. And thank you so much, Sharon, for the wonderful presentation. We sincerely appreciate your effort and all your organization have been doing, to create the culture of life, to defend the dignity of family and all that. Okay, my own question is that I'm someone that so much believe in a teamwork. These are the strategies and these are the ways we should go about these protests, which you have outlined. Okay, my question is, how do we come together as a team to achieve this goal? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think the concrete steps that could be taken is, first of all, I would like to commend the organizers of this conference and thank them for inviting me here. I'm very, very grateful, and all of the topics that you are addressing are critical to the protection of African families and Nigerian family. How can we come together? I would suggest that you contact the organizers of this forum. I would suggest that you contact us, that you can email me. I'll give you my email address and I'll connect you to all of the groups in Africa that are fighting this. My email address is Sharon, SHARON, Sharon at familywatch.org. I would suggest and encourage and request the organizers of this conference to possibly schedule a post briefing for all those who want to get involved. And whether you're in Nigeria or another country, we could do a Zoom call and discuss and really create plans. We could invite Kenyan Christian Professionals Forum, who have already done a lot, and also the group we know that is forming in Malawi, and start to unite everyone together via a Zoom conference. I think that would be a great way to start the organizing and as you said, uniting those that are concerned together, because then you will all have much greater power.
Is it possible to ask a question from the Netherlands?
Yes, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I see that you come from Igede in Nigeria. From our church congregation in the very place Igede, there they have a mission, done mission for many years from the Netherlands. Maybe you know them or not. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that I, with my colleague Meskerem, was in Brussels last week at the African Union, European Union Summit, and we met the Nigerian delegation, including the Nigerian ambassador to the EU, and we talked about this, the things Sharon brought up on the ACP-EU agreement, and we also gave them the 7 questions, and they were very thankful for it and shared it through the whole delegation. So thank you very much, Sharon, and also you from Igede for organizing this very useful and timely conference. Thank you.
Yes, I'd just like to say that is Hank from the Netherlands. He is the head of Christian Council International, and he and his colleague Meskerem, who is in Ethiopia at the African Union, living there, works with our Family Watch Africa team there to help protect the institution of the family in African Union policies. And they have been working diligently along with us and trying to also mobilize the Christian religions and also the members of parliament in Europe that are pro-family and pro-life to fight this within the European Union. So they are great partners working with us.
Okay. So we want to appreciate all the online participants for their rapt attention given to this lecture. And we equally appreciate you, Sharon Slater, and your team for this good work done so far. We pray that the Lord will continue to enrich you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been an honor and a pleasure.